News of the day went from breaking news to a presidential campaign ad in record time, with the Harris for President campaign setting a new speed record today in converting breaking news into a campaign ad.
I talked to Putin a lot. I got along with him well. And I know Putin so well. I'd like to congratulate Vladimir Putin for having made yet another great deal. Did you see the deal we made?
Talk to him like that?
Oh, no, I had a very good relationship. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. And I'm trying to tell people, no, it's a good thing. When you see Putin and you see all of these people, they're at the top of their game. And I also have a very good relationship, as you know, with President Putin. And I think if we win, I think we're going to get it resolved very quickly. I really think we're going to get it resolved.
I hope we have more good relations.
We're going to have, I see. Yeah, but you know, it takes two to tango, you know.
The shocking breaking news of the morning is the biggest October surprise of the 21st century. The term October surprise was first used in presidential campaigning to refer to President Jimmy Carter's failed attempt to rescue American hostages held in Iran. In October of 1980, within weeks of the presidential election, which President Carter then lost to Ronald Reagan. The surprise news in October of 1980 that the president had tried to rescue the hostages but failed was regarded by the news media as the October surprise that determined the outcome of the election. Just as a successful release of the hostages, rescue of the hostages by Jimmy Carter probably would have been the October surprise that won Jimmy Carter his reelection. Today's October surprise, revealed this morning by the Washington Post, would have crushed any presidential candidate prior to the Trump era and Donald Trump. The Washington Post reported this morning that Bob Woodward's new book, which will be published next week, titled War, reveals that in the darkest hour of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, when there was no vaccine and when most people in the world, including most people in this country, could not obtain COVID tests, Donald Trump sent priceless COVID tests to Vladimir Putin for Vladimir Putin's personal use. The Washington Post's breaking news headline on this story this morning was, Trump secretly sent COVID tests to Putin during 2020 shortage, new book says. The Post reported, as the coronavirus tore through the world in 2020 and the United States and other countries confronted a shortage of tests designed to detect the illness, President Donald Trump secretly sent coveted tests to Russian President Vladimir Putin for his personal use. Putin, petrified of the virus, accepted the supplies but took pains to prevent political fallout, not for him, but for his American counterpart. He cautioned Trump not to reveal that he had dispatched the scarce medical equipment to Moscow, according to a new book by Washington Post associate editor Bob Woodward. Putin, according to the book, told Trump, I don't want you to tell anybody because people will get mad at you, not me. I don't want you to tell anybody. Donald Trump followed Vladimir Putin's advice and did not tell anyone. But that's exactly the kind of thing that doesn't stay secret forever when Bob Woodward is on the case. Vladimir Putin's intense fear of COVID-19 was on public display throughout the worst of the pandemic, with repeated photographs of Vladimir Putin sitting at the end of a comically long table, sometimes berating Russian generals at the other end of the table for their failures in his war in Ukraine. That, of course, is French President Macron, who was also once at the end of that table. The book is filled with other revelations about Donald Trump, including Bob Woodward's conclusion that Donald Trump was worse than Richard Nixon. Quote, these interactions between Trump and the authoritarian leader of a country at war with an American ally form the basis of Woodward's conclusion that Trump is worse than Richard M. Nixon, whose presidency was undone by the Watergate scandal exposed a half-century ago by Woodward and his Washington Post colleague, Carl Bernstein. Worse than Nixon. No one would know better than Bob Woodward, who will join us on this program Monday night when we will be able to go into much greater detail about these and other revelations in his new book. The Washington Post quotes Bob Woodward writing in the book, Trump was the most reckless and impulsive president in American history and is demonstrating the very same character as a presidential candidate in 2024. That kind of reporting would have ended any presidential campaign prior to the Trump era, would have destroyed the candidate. And devastating reporting like that would still destroy a Democratic presidential nominee. But Donald Trump has converted the Republican Party into the Trump Party and appears to have established a lock on 47% of the vote in this country, which, if properly distributed by that curse on American democracy, the Electoral College, could win Donald Trump the presidency. New national polling shows Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump today, 49-46. So Kamala Harris is on track to get millions more votes than Donald Trump, just as Hillary Clinton did and just as Joe Biden did. But this is the one country in which winning the most votes for president doesn't mean you become president, because of the Electoral College, which was deliberately established, it should always be remembered, by the founders as an anti-democracy institution that would prevent mere voters from actually controlling the outcome in presidential elections. That was the purposeful design of the Electoral College. Without the Electoral College, Donald Trump would have vanished from our politics in November of 2016. But thanks to the Electoral College, the person Bob Woodward calls the most reckless and impulsive president in American history is still with us. Today, Howard Stern asked Vice President Harris about the big breaking news of the day.
Bob Woodward's book was saying that Trump was sending COVID tests to Putin, and Putin said, don't let anyone know. I mean, what is going on? What do you make of that?
So I actually said it even in the debate. I believe that Donald Trump has this desire to be a dictator. He admires strong men, and he gets played by them because he thinks that they're his friends.
Yeah.
And they are manipulating him full time and manipulating him by flattery.
Yeah.
And with favor. And so in the midst, to your point, as reported by Bob Woodward, in the height of the pandemic, and remember, and your listeners will remember, people were dying by the hundreds.
Yeah.
Everybody was scrambling to get these kits, the tests, the COVID test kits.
Couldn't get them.
Couldn't get them.
Right.
Couldn't get them anywhere.
Right.
And this guy who is president of the United States is sending them to Russia, to a murderous dictator for his personal use. That is just the most recent stark example of who Donald Trump is, that he secretly sent COVID test kits for the personal use of Putin, of Russia, an adversary to the United States, when he was talking about Americans should be putting bleach in their blood.
Vice President Harris began her public appearances today on The View.
Donald Trump prefers to run on problems instead of fixing problems. He's not solution-oriented. And again, I will invite people, if you really need to know how he thinks, since he doesn't do these kinds of interviews, watch his rallies. He spends full time engaged in grievance about what has happened to him.
Right.
He spends full time perpetuating lies and misinformation. He spends full time talking about fictional characters, you know. I mean,
name calling, a lot of name calling
and demeaning people, belittling people. But what he does not talk about is you. He does not talk about what you need. He does not talk about what your parents need, what your children's need. That's not what he talks about. He doesn't talk about your child's needs. He talks about his needs.
Right.
And I think, again, back to the point, in this election, people are ready for a new generation of leadership that's about fixing problems.
Thank you.
Medicare was created in 1965 by a Democratic Congress and Democratic President Lyndon Johnson. No Republican president ever would have created Medicare. No Republican Congress ever would have done that. It is the most popular government health care program in the United States, and actually one of the most efficient and admired government health care systems in the world. I've talked to health ministers from around the world about this, and they all point to Medicare as the system that they think is the one that works better than their own. Medicare was designed to help people over 65, primarily with hospital bills at first, but Medicare coverage has expanded over the years and decades as the accepted definition of necessary medical treatment has expanded over the years. And today, Kamala Harris announced an expansion of benefits in the Medicare program that she would like to enact to deliver the kind of health care that people often need now in the final years of their lives.
I took care of my mother when she was sick. She was diagnosed with cancer. And so it is a personal experience for me, as well as something I care deeply about. You know, taking care of a parent, you know, that means trying to cook what they want to eat, right? What they can eat. It means picking out clothes for them that it's soft enough that it doesn't irritate their skin, right? It means trying to think of something funny to make them laugh or smile. And there's so much about that that really is about giving folks dignity. And to your point about being in the sandwich generation, there are so many people in our country who are right in the middle. They're taking care of their kids and they're taking care of their aging parents. And it's just almost impossible to do it all, especially if they work. We're finding that so many are then having to leave their job, which means losing a source of income. Not to mention the emotional stress. And so what I am proposing is that basically what we will do is allow Medicare to cover in-home health care. They want to stay in their home. They don't want to go somewhere else. Plus, for the family to send them to a residential care facility to hire somebody is so expensive.
Wipes you out.
And I'll just say, Whoopi, here's the other thing about it. You know, people say, well, how are you going to pay for it? Here's the thing. Here's how we pay for it. Part of what I also intend to do is allow Medicare to continue to negotiate drug prices against these big pharmaceutical companies, which means we are going to save Medicare the money because we're not going to be paying these high prices, and those resources are best then put in a way that helps a family like the one you are describing.
Which you have already done.
Which we have already done with insulin.
Yeah.
So it can be done. It absolutely can be done.
Healthcare policy experts in government and outside of government have known for decades now that the most expensive place to deliver healthcare is in a hospital. The least expensive place to deliver health care can be, in many instances, at home. Vice President Harris's new proposal recognizes the new realities of the way we live and the way we die. After Vice President Harris announced her new Medicare home health care proposal, her vice presidential running mate, Governor Tim Walz, said, quote, "My dad died after a long battle with lung cancer. Anyone who's cared for a loved one knows it takes a toll. Caregiving is already stressful enough. It shouldn't be this damn expensive. Kamala Harris and I have a plan. Let's strengthen Medicare to cover home care." With Florida now expecting to be hit by possibly the worst hurricane we have ever seen in Florida, that means we are just days away from Donald Trump lying about federal disaster relief in the aftermath of another hurricane, just as he has lied repeatedly about the federal response to last week's hurricane, which all of the governors involved, Republican governors, have actually praised.
Right now, there is a monster storm barreling towards my state of Florida, a place that's still reeling from Hurricane Helene. Trump is lying, claiming that the Biden administration is intentionally withholding aid from the areas where Republicans live and that FEMA funds are being redirected to migrants. Ironically, that is something he did in 2019. What do you think the effect of these lies are, and why is he doing this?
It's profound, and it is the height of irresponsibility and, frankly, callousness. I mean, we're talking about real human beings and their lives, and them losing everything. Everything. This woman lost her husband, her child lost her father. People are losing their home with no hope of ever being able to reconstruct or return. And the idea that somebody would be playing political games for the sake of himself, but this is so consistent about Donald Trump. He puts himself before the needs of others. I fear that he really lacks empathy on a very basic level to care about the suffering of other people and then understand the role of a leader is not to beat people down, it's to lift people up.
Absolutely.
Especially in a time of crisis.
Today, the Harris-Walz campaign released this ad.
I worked in the Trump administration.
Never in a million years did I ever think that I'd be working in the White House with a president that didn't care about the American people.
He would suggest not giving disaster relief to states that hadn't voted for him.
I remember one time after a wildfire in California, he wouldn't send relief because it was a Democratic state. So we went as far as looking up how many votes he got in those impacted areas to show him these are people who voted for you. This isn't normal. The job of the president is to protect Americans, regardless of politics.
If Trump's elected again, there'll be no one to stop his worst instincts. You'll have yes men help him implement Project 2025's agenda. Unchecked power, no guardrails.
They will be serving one man. I am voting for Kamala Harris because she will put the safety and security of every American first, whether they voted for her or not.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
One of the other huge revelations in Bob Woodward's new book, which we will discuss with him on Monday on this program, is that Donald Trump has spoken to Russia's President Vladimir Putin as many as 7 times since Donald Trump left office. The New York Times reports Bob Woodward's findings this way. Former President Donald J. Trump has secretly spoken with President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia as many as 7 times since leaving office, even as he was pressuring Republicans to block military aid to Ukraine to fight Russian invaders, according to a new book by journalist Bob Woodward. The book, titled War and scheduled to be published next week, describes a scene in early 2024 at Mar-a-Lago, Mr. Trump's estate in Florida, when the former president ordered an aide out of his office so he could conduct a phone call with Mr. Putin. The unidentified aide said the two might have spoken a half dozen other times since Mr. Trump left the White House.